Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are just going to give another 30 seconds as people are joining. Great. Perfect. We have people are still joining, but we have quite a busy agenda, so we will get started. Welcome to this closeout event of the Sustainable Water Partnership webinar on advancing water security. I'm Nicolas Villemino. I'm the Technical Director at Winrock International, and I'm pleased to open this session and welcome you all on behalf of the Sustainable Water Partnership team, Winrock International, and its partners. Please make sure that your microphones remain muted during the session. If you have technical difficulties, especially sound problems, you may want to log off and rejoin the webinar or contact the administrator in the chat for support. Feel free to ask your questions and share your comments to the organizers in the question box throughout the webinar. We will have panels and we will try to answer as many as we can during the course of the webinar, or we will try to address them another way after the event. The Sustainable Water Partnership, SWP, is a 5-year USAID funded project, and during the next 2.5 hours, we will reflect and discuss on the achievements of SWP to advance water security over the past 5 years as we're coming to the end of the project. Mr. Alex Grace, SWP Project Director and Project Program Manager at Winrock International, will cover this in detail in his presentation. We will then have 2 panel discussions, one with the staff of SWP who was involved in testing and piloting our approaches in Africa and Asia. And the second panel will hear our esteemed partners discuss what comes next for water security. To get us started, I will now ask Mr. Jeff Goldberg for some opening remarks on behalf of USAID. We are grateful to have been trusted by USAID to work on water security closely with the agency. Jeff Goldberg is the director of USAID's Center for Water Security, Sanitation and Hygiene, with global responsibilities for coordinating the agency's water and sanitation related foreign assistance. He acts as a technical expert and authority, and he advises agency leadership on strategic, technical, legislative, and budgetary matters related to water and sanitation. Jeff has provided technical leadership on water and sanitation programming throughout Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And he manages agency-wide efforts to implement the US Global Water Strategy. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Nicolas, and thank you as well for the invitation to kick off today's closeout event for USAID's Sustainable Water Partnership. Hard to believe that we're already here and that 5 years have come and gone, but the topic of advancing water security could not be more important right now, and I'm incredibly happy to be here to reflect on the many accomplishments and contributions of the Sustainable Water Partnership. So just to set the scene a little bit for the discussion today, I want to affirm that at USAID, we recognize that lack of access to high quality water for people, economies, and ecosystems, along with lack of access to sanitation and hygiene, remain urgent global challenges. addressing water insecurity is increasingly critical in the face of worsening and more frequent shocks and crises, looking no further than COVID-19 over the past 18 months, climate change, and conflict. We know that crucial water supplies are shrinking or increasingly polluted for many reasons, including through inadequate sanitation and poor management of fecal waste, and that an estimated 90% of impacts of climate change are related to water. By that, we mean droughts, floods, or water contamination. We further know that by 2050, more than 5 billion people will lack sufficient water at least once a month per year, up from 3.6 billion today, and that water insecurity could cost some regions up to 6% of their gross domestic product. An important illustration from a recent World Bank report comes to mind when reflecting on this. It highlights that when urban water services are disrupted due to water shortages, firms suffer significant and lasting reductions in their sales and employment. And particularly vulnerable are small and informal firms, a major source of employment in developing countries where we all work. Considering these same urban areas, rising seas and storm surges could cost more than $1 trillion per year. And what's more, water shortages were also linked to 10% of the increase in total migration within countries between 1970 and 2000. And this undermines the efforts to enhance resilience and stabilize humanitarian crises that are growing both more frequent and more protracted in their length. Certainly, when reflecting on these grim statistics, the scope of the problem can sometimes feel immense. This was further affirmed through a recent World Resources Institute report that estimated that the cost of delivering sustainable water management is approximately $1.04 trillion annually, with the largest drivers of this cost being associated with managing and meeting water demand for population growth and decreasing availability of water resources. Despite all this, we know that the return on investment for advancing a more holistic approach to improving water security at household, community, basin, and large scales is very high. A recent report from the Global Adaptation Commission estimated investing in improved water resources management along with disaster risk reduction related to water is one of the most cost-effective ways to climate-proof development that we have in our collective toolbox. And so all of this brings us today in reflecting on SWP's contributions in this space. The hypothesis that we at Usaid made 5 years ago when we launched SWP was that in the face of these challenges and in light of the evidence, it is no longer enough for us to focus solely on delivering drinking water and sanitation services and improving hygiene within households, as this had been the focus of our investment in the sector for many years. We recognize that a more holistic approach is urgently needed, and one not need look much further than the day zero situations, such as recent examples in Cape Town, Chennai, and Sao Paulo. So with all of that in mind, if we are really interested in sustainable services, we need not only be working to increase access to water and sanitation, we know that we also need to be working with a broader array of water users to manage water scarcity. We need to be working to safeguard the environment and ecosystem services, and we need to be working on governance, equity, and finance in the sector so people and economies can better cope with rising water stress. And certainly, SWP's work has been at the forefront of efforts within Usaid to advance water security as a framework for this type of more holistic work on water, one that addresses equitable water access as well as governance and finance of water resources management as a way to begin moving the needle on enormous water and sanitation challenges that we collectively face. So as you'll hear throughout the course of today's session, SWP's work has been influential and very timely in terms of advancing the profile of water security through thought leadership and in practice on the ground through development and application of its water security improvement process. As SWP comes to a close, reflecting on and building from the lessons learned is critical, as we at Usaid will continue to build on the groundwork and the momentum SWP has provided to advance broader water security work at the agency. So I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion, very thankful for the SWP team, for all of their efforts over the years, and look forward to discussing how we can collectively take this important work of advancing water security forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff, for that. Very much appreciated. Let's quickly introduce myself. As Nicola mentioned, my name is Alex Grace, and I am the SWP Project Director. And to echo Jeff, I do want to thank everybody for joining today. In my presentation, I'm going to cover a snippet of all the good work we've done over the past 5 years and go over some of the lessons learned that we gathered along the way. But I want to start with what SWP is centered around, and that is water security. So we define water security as the adaptive capacity to safeguard the availability of, access to, safe use of, an adequate, reliable, and resilient quantity and quality of water for health, livelihoods, ecosystems, and economies. Okay, I'm gonna stop there for a second. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but as we all know, water cuts across all sectors and every aspect of our lives. So the question for us was really how to develop a holistic approach, as Jeff mentioned, to address water risks, whether related to WASH, climate change, agriculture, biodiversity, and other issues. So we were able to do this in partnership with many great institutions, including Tetra Tech, IUCN, SEI, the World Resources Institute, the CEO Water Mandate, and M-Water. And together, we were able to support USAID and partners on the ground with technical services and program implementation activities. And all these activities were centered around this process I have here on the slide, the water security improvement process. This is a multi-step, iterative stakeholder engagement process that assesses water security risks and implementation measures. Now, under SWP, we developed analytical tools and assessments to support this process. We tested it on the ground, applying it to specific country contexts, doing our best to leverage partnerships along the way that could help us in the implementation of SWP, and that should ensure that many of our efforts live beyond SWP. We also distilled learnings and best practices from this process, which we shared through a host of knowledge management fora. Now to pause quickly on analytical tools and assessments. Nicola will go into more detail about this in a little bit, but generally our work here falls into two major buckets. The first is compiling best practices on water security at large. This included our Water Security Improvement Toolkit, a host of water security country profiles, as well as technical papers on topics such as private sector engagement in water security or source water protection in WASH systems. The second big bucket is focused on lessons learned from our country-specific activities in the form of case studies and field-based technical documents. So now for our country-specific activities. These come into three main categories. We've had field-based activities where SWP had a small presence, namely in Cambodia and the Mara Basin. We had targeted USAID mission support, and we also had associate awards. For our Cambodia activity, we applied the WSI, so the Water Security Improvement Process, in the Stung Shinit River Basin in Cambodia, which is a major tributary of the Tonle Sap Lake. If you're not familiar with Cambodia, the Tonle Sap Lake is not only Cambodia's largest lake, but also its most important from a water security perspective. So using the WSI process, we started off with understanding our stakeholders by conducting an inventory of water stakeholders across the basin. And this included the Kampong Thong provincial government, farmer water user communities, community forestry groups, and community fishery groups, among others. We worked closely with them on a water risk assessment. And so for this, we conducted a lot of studies and analyses, which included things like a seasonal water quality survey, a biodiversity evaluation, a water balance calculation, We also applied models like the Water Evaluation Planning Tool, or WEEP model. And so with all this going into our assessment, we were able to help local stakeholders identify and prioritize water security risks. On top of the assessment, we also wanted to test the work on the ground. And so we identified quick wins with our stakeholders on water security improvement activities. This included things like wash awareness raising and cleanup events in communes across the basin. These events helped build the capacity in water security activities for our stakeholders, but they also increased buy-in as we facilitated a basin-wide strategic action plan. And so when thinking about the strategic action plan, a big question for us was how to ensure its sustainability after SWP. And to work on that, we helped establish the Stung Shinit River Basin Management Committee, which was signed into law in April 2019. The management committee appointed 2 secretariat coordinators to continue coordinating the implementation of the strategic action plan and should help in its sustainability beyond SWP. Our second activity on the ground was in the River Mara Basin, where SWP built on past USAID investments, including the Prepared program to tackle water security at the transboundary level. Here we supported an MOU that was signed between Kenya and Tanzania back in 2015 and supported the implementation of it. We worked closely with the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, the Ministries of Water in both Kenya and Tanzania, Kenya's Water Resources Authority, and the Lake Victoria Basin Water Board in Tanzania, as well as water resource user associations in both Kenya and Tanzania. Again, this work centered around the WSI process. We facilitated workshops on robust decision-making support to help our stakeholders define and analyze key uncertainties to water resources in the Mara. Uncertainties like climate change, development policies, and potential sources of water demand. Working closely with our partners, Tetra Tech, SEI, IHE Delft, and M-Water, we coupled this with studies and analytical tools like the WEEP model to assess water demand, availability, and abstraction. This all led to the development of the water allocation plan for the Lower Mara. This plan is an example of how we combine strong stakeholder engagement with a strong evidence base to support robust decision-making, which should help mitigate risks from overallocation, over-abstraction, and illegal abstraction. But this also needs to be framed within good governance. And so on that end, we worked with the Lake Victoria Basin Commission and the Mara's Joint Management Committee to address the overall management of the basin. And this included preparing a white paper on water sharing principles, and in practical terms, we developed terms of references and an operation plan for the Joint Technical Committee that will help operationalize it in the future. Like in Cambodia, we also wanted to show what could happen on the ground. And so we helped develop sub-catchment management plans and supported the water resources user associations in implementing livelihood and water security activities. And so these included things like beekeeping, tree nurseries, and spring protection. Now I'll stop there and explain what beekeeping has to do with water security. In short, it provides revenue in the form of the sale of honey products, and the sale of artisanal beehives that they manufacture. These revenue help fund indigenous tree nurseries and catchment conservation and reforestation efforts using the seedlings from the tree nurseries. And so with the beekeeping to date, the water user associations have developed over 300 beehives. They've have over 81 kilograms of honey produced, and nearly 40,000 seedlings have been propagated. All this work in the Mara could not have been done without leveraging the support of a number of other partners working in the basin, including IHE Delft, which I've mentioned, GIZ, WWF, and the Mara Beekeeping Institute, as well as the USAID Atlas project, among others. These partners not only facilitated our ability to implement the MARA activity, but they will also help ensure sustainability beyond SWP. So those were our field-based activities. Now, switching to the targeted USAID mission support that SWP provided. I'll start with our largest activity, which was in Southern Africa, where over 3 years, we coordinated a partnership between USAID, the government of South Africa's Department of Science and Innovation, the Groundwater Management Institute of Southern Africa Development Community, the IBM Research Lab, the Water Research Commission of South Africa, as well as the US Geological Survey. Together, we help provide financial and technical support for 4 research projects exploring the use of big data analytics to improve knowledge creation and evidence-based management for transboundary aquifers across Southern Africa. Our mission support, we also had targeted mission support in El Salvador, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan. Here we conducted research and analyses to help assess water security risks in specific basins in these countries and help inform USAID programming for these missions. So our third category of country-specific activities are these associate awards. SWP is a leader award with associate awards, and so we've had 2 associate awards to date. The first was in Nepal, and over 2 years, the integrated water management activity worked with 10 USAID projects to facilitate coordination on improved water security in 2 targeted watersheds in western Nepal. Some of our main recommendations from this work have been applied by the SEED office, and USAID Nepal is using these recommendations in the programming. And those have included establishing integration working groups led by the mission, using watersheds as the unit of geographic focus for future water-related projects, prioritizing collaboration with local governments to build their capacity to address water security risks, developing and incorporating water security integration language to be included in future awards, and sharing a record of collaboration activities among implementing partners to facilitate the design of future activities. Our second associate award is in the Sahel. So in Niger and Burkina Faso, Terre ou Vie, or Earth, Water, and Life, for those of you that are not French-speaking, is working to improve water security, enhance sustainable productive land use, and improve the management of shocks, risks, and stresses, especially as climate risks become more intense. This activity covers 25 communes in Niger and 15 in Burkina Faso. Now, through all this work that I just mentioned, and many others that don't fit in the 20-minute presentation, SWP has built a treasure trove of learnings, including over a dozen case studies and technical papers, training webinars and series, seminar series at the Wilson Center, World Water Week presentation, and a host of other lessons learned focused on water security, all of which I encourage you to browse at your leisure on our website or at our Global Waters microsite that will continue to be a resource beyond SWP. But before I finish, I want to share some of the main lessons learned, 5 to be precise, that we pulled from our work. I could go into much more, but we would need a longer webinar for that. But so for these 5, firstly, we found that water security approaches, almost by nature, need to be iterative. As much as we may want it to be the case, water security improvement measures will not address every aspect of water security, particularly in large geographies. But it is important to assess what works well and where improvements are necessary, so that we can make sure that future investments are targeted and ensure more sustained and scalable impact. Secondly, water security risks require precision and depth. And so this requires assessing the root causes and considering potential scenarios. When we have the data, there's a wealth of models and tools to build that evidence base. And with SWP, we've had the pleasure to work with brilliant minds in this field to test those tools. But this must also be coupled with the wealth of knowledge from local stakeholders, especially when data gaps exist, as they are key to filling those data gaps and getting to that root cause and assessing those potential scenarios. This leads me to my third point, and it's about stakeholder engagement. This is nothing new, but it is clear that future water security programming at USAID should continue to center around stakeholder engagement, including the private sector. Understanding the needs, priorities, and motivations of stakeholders is obviously critical to success, and ensuring that they feel like partners rather than just beneficiaries is also key. For this, stakeholder mapping and engagement strategies should be integrated into future programming, and it is also important to integrate them from the beginning to the end of the process. Also using a political economy assessment methodology to best identify how power dynamics interact with water security can be very useful to best target interventions. Our fourth lesson learned is about governance, specifically governance across scales. Water security programming needs to engage at the local, basin, regional, national, and in some cases transboundary level. But while countries have national water management policies, we know that it's often the case that they are being applied unevenly at different governance scales. And so there's an opportunity to translate these high-level strategies into specific water security activities at the basin and provincial levels. This can happen in just a few targeted basins or provinces, or it can even be scaled up nationally depending on the amount of investment and, of course, the country context. Finally, this last one is something that I'm sure many of us have in the back of our minds most of the time. But our water resources are already being impacted by the realities of climate change. And the more we can integrate climate knowledge in the form of climate models, climate risk screening, and the quantification of climate mitigation co-benefits in our water security intervention, the better we'll be able to secure the future of our water security. So I'll stop there and thank everybody again for joining this webinar. I'll hand it over now to Jen Holthaus, who will be moderating a panel discussion with our experts who made our country-specific work a reality. Over to you, Jen.
Jen, we can't hear you. You're still muted and your camera is not working.
Can you hear me now?
Now we hear you.
Okay, I'm going to try and keep my camera while the panel is going on. So, good morning. I think you can hopefully see all of our panelists. So I'm going to just continue. I'm just the facilitator here. My name is Jen Holthaus. I'm a senior program officer at ANAC, and I'm very pleased to be facilitating this panel. I got to know these panelists by working with them on case studies and technical papers about their work in SWP and the 4 countries that they are representing. And I'm glad they have a chance to know their lesson. Go ahead, Nick.
You're very close to the mic, it seems. We can't hear you. We hear you very weirdly.
Is this better?
A little bit better, yes.
I'll talk more softly. We have 4 panelists, as you can see on the slide. They are Dr. Clara Bocchino, coordinator of the Big Data Analytics and Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa. Mr. Benal Moon, team leader of the Water Security Improvement Activity in Cambodia's Sangchini Basin. Mr. Gordon Mambo, team leader of the Sustainable Water Management for the Mara River Basin Activity in Kenya and Tanzania. And Ms. Liz Kendall, activity manager for the Integrated Watershed Management Activity in Nepal. So I'm going to start by asking a question to Gordon. So Gordon, thinking about the water security improvement process, which we just heard about, or we call it the WSI process, stakeholders need to buy into the process and remain engaged for the process to be effective. What challenges do you see in engagement?
Thank you, Jen. I hope that question is referred to me. I didn't hear it very well. But I've said, as been introduced, my name is Gordon Mumbo. I was the team leader for sustainable water management for the Mara Basin, a transboundary river that is shared between Kenya and Tanzania. Because of power outage where I am, I'm outside the fence of my home in the village. So if you hear chicken passing around, don't worry. This is the village life. Yeah, but I would say stakeholders is critical, as Alex has mentioned in the work. And what we found important is just before we commenced the implementation of the project, we had planned an Inception Workshop. And before the Inception Workshop, we did a rapid stakeholders mapping to give us an understanding who are the stakeholders within the Mara River Basin. This included government departments, NGOs, individual water users. And then we called them at an inception meeting and tabled the scope of the project, the objective that was intended to achieve. And this gave them a chance to set priorities, areas of priorities where we could start implementation. And I must admit that this gave us the greatest buy-in, because whatever we went on the ground to implement or to demonstrate really had the blessing of the stakeholders who participated in this inception meeting. It was not just an inception meeting to introduce whatever we were going to do, but we gave the stakeholders an opportunity to redesign the project. So the process of engaging them to redesign the activity and come up with the priority areas really helped us. And in terms of sustaining this moving forward, we kept constant communication with the stakeholders and feedback processes. In the planning process, whenever an activity was planned, we would work together with them, plan the activity. Midway in between, we could have a briefing discussion together with the stakeholders. And at the end of the activity, we were also using a process of self-evaluation, where we were evaluating ourselves with the stakeholders on the progress that we were making. I must admit this became very important in terms of transferring ownership of the activities to the stakeholders in all the aspects. And particularly in the case of Mara being a transboundary river, we had to do this. In terms of the challenges that we faced working with the stakeholder, it was basically the communication aspects that sometimes could be very expensive, and if not properly planned during the project design, could cause disruptions. Because sometimes it involved a lot of meetings and traveling to meet the stakeholders. But at the end of the day, it was really important and critical because we had the buy-in that we needed. I think I would stop here, and maybe later I could come back if there are any questions to give a chance to my colleagues also to say something.
Great, thank you, Gordon. And I want to apologize for my sound issues. Am I sounding better now?
It's much better now.
Okay, great. So I want to reintroduce the panelists as well. And also I want to let you know for the audience that we'll have 2 rounds of questions. One will be after I've asked each panelist 1 question, and we'll have a few minutes for audience questions. And then I'll ask each panelist 1 more question, and then we'll have a few minutes for audience questions again. So please note your questions and hold on to them for that time. So the person you just heard from is Mr. Gordon Mumbo, our team leader of the Sustainable Water Management for the Mara River Basin activity in Kenya and Tanzania. Our other 3 panelists are Dr. Clara Bacino, coordinator of the Big Data Analytics and Transboundary Water Collaboration for Southern Africa, Mr. Banara Min, team leader of the Water Security Improvement Activity in Cambodia's Songchinit Basin, and Ms. Liz Kendall, activity manager for the Integrated Watershed Management Activity in Nepal. So we'll continue with our question about stakeholder engagement, and I'm going to ask the same question to Banara. So in Cambodia, again, thinking about the water security improvement process, what challenges did you encounter in engaging stakeholders, and how did you overcome those challenges to get stakeholder buy-in? I think you need to unmute.
I Okay, now I'm muted. Do you hear me? Okay, okay, thank you so much. I would like to share the key challenges that we face here in Cambodia during the SWP implementation here in the Stockholm River Basin. One of the most important challenges in Cambodia was, how to incentivize stakeholder engagement. And as many people know, and in Cambodia, there are a lot of NGOs who are implementing water and other water-related projects. They use, most of them, they use their hardware intensive. I mean, they sometimes they just budget directly to the organization, to the people to implement. But for SWP, we did not replicate this kind of a hardware contribution, but we still want the stakeholder to experience the immediate benefit of engaging in the water security improvement process, and how to overcome the challenges. Here in Cambodia, we have some kind of activity, but there are two or three activity, two activities that is very important that I would like to share with you right now. SWP Cambodia use the capacity building training for selected community leader to generate interest, understanding, and engagement. We developed a series of capacity building training packages around the soft skill training that were identified and prioritized by the focus group. And the focus group requested a number of training subjects, but they agreed. They agreed and they selected some key training topic. For example, the training on leadership skill, training on community mobilization, training on the basic budgeting and financial management, and also resource management. And the participation skill were also integrated into the training curriculum. And this set of a standard for stakeholder participation going forward with the water security improvement processes. And all the stakeholders, all our key stakeholders understood well after they received a numbers of trainings what they were expected to see during the project implementation. And the second is that we use the quick wins as incentive to motivate and mobilize stakeholders in the water security improvement processes. The quick win for us here, the project facilitated to make sure that requires stakeholders to apply their soft skill trainings in their daily work with their community, which was very helpful for them. Which was very helpful for them. And for example, the real example here in the Stockholm watershed was we have a number of working group under the need of the River Basin Management Committee, but one of the working group called WASH Working Group, they proposed the installation of billboard in important location around the basin to remind water user of how their behavior affect their downstream neighbors. And in that potential location, there were installed 8 water security educational billboard in high traffic site like the commune, village center, where many people visited in and out, and especially along the Stockholm reservoir, which is used for irrigation and recreation, and many people visited that areas. And through these early trainings and the quick wins approach that we use, SWP was able to generate the necessary interest to advance stakeholder participation in the subsequent assessment, planning, and implementation step of the water security improvement process.
Great, thank you, Bernard. Excellent. So we've heard a little bit about challenges with stakeholder engagement and how 2 of our activities overcame those challenges. And now we want to shift slightly to the slightly different role that we played in a couple of other activities, which was to coordinate and facilitate different stakeholder groups. And I want to now turn to Clara. So SWP's role in the Big Data Collaboration Project was mainly to coordinate multiple stakeholders with competing interests. How did you go about convincing those actors to work together toward improving water security? And what actions that you took resonated most with those groups?
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the question and thank you for the invitation to attend this seminar. As regards to your questions, I think it's important to agree on one point, that stakeholder engagement and facilitation is not about convincing people to work together or to sort of discard parts or elements of their agenda for the sake of something that they cannot see, but it's about learning. So the idea is that as a facilitator, you almost like a peace builder, one that helps the different stakeholders to build their common vision, to agree that that is their vision and then to work towards it. So in terms of what is your role is that of creating that enabling environment for collaboration, ensure they continue to work together even when sometimes their agenda clashes with each other, and it might come up for different small activities, for instance, and or giving priorities to where the funding goes. But you have to be able to anticipate those clashes or those potential clashes and to address them even before they come up, so that you don't work in a conflictual environment, but you try to prevent that from happening. And by the same concept, don't let any misunderstandings or perceptions become the source of conflict. So when you're dealing with people and personalities coming from big institutions and, as you said, different agendas, it is important that you as a facilitator know who you're dealing with, know their institutions, and know them also personally as well. So develop a relationship with them so that you're able to understand and facilitate the process of engagement with the others by creating a relationship of trust between yourself and each of the partners individually, and then all of them together. And in my case, it was a little bit difficult sometimes because our partners were also in a way the beneficiaries. The project that we did was about creating potentially a tool for supporting decision-making in transboundary river basins. And our partners were government institutions or donor institutions or private sector big data specialists like IBM. And so we need to make sure that we really wanted to make sure that what we were doing would actually be of benefit to us as well as to others in the field. So what resonated the most amongst them and among some of the people that have collaborated with us along the way in Southern Africa and beyond was firstly the novelty of the research that we were funding. We were funding cross-sectoral research, merging big data analytics, so computer sciences, with water management from a geohydrological perspective, so really technical expertise in the water sector. And so that was new. That was new for the country, and especially when you try to involve both academic institutions and private consultancy firms to work together. So in many ways, and the second part was also in terms of, before I forget, in terms of the partners being also beneficiaries, the idea of creating an output that could be used. And in many ways, that is still a little bit of a sore point for the partners as well as for myself, because we learned so much along the way that we really didn't know before. And that process of learning meant that we understood too late the needs of the research teams in terms of getting support for further integration, for making sure that their work would actually fit in together and fit into a wider toolbox, if you wish, that could be used just at the end of the project. So we're still working on that. And so this is not really a negative reflection. It's actually quite positive, because we asked research teams to challenge themselves on learning. At the same time, we as partners and facilitator and myself had to learn a lot. I had to learn a lot about water, transboundary water governance. I had to learn a lot about big data analytics. And in that way, even the fact that we had the trainings helped a lot with our partners like IUCN or IBM or USGS. So everything was a process of learning, from the research teams to us managing the research teams. And so what we figured out in many ways through our successes and a little bit of conundrums along the way was that to do experimental research is probably just as difficult now as it was in the past, especially when you're trying to bring different sectors together, and especially when you're managing research really as a learner and not so much as a person that has all the facts and all the assumptions already proven and tested. So this was our experience, and what resonated therefore for us was novelty, lessons learning, and try to apply that for a next phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Great. I'm going to ask the same question now to Liz related to Nepal, the Integrated Water Management Associate Award. So that award was primarily for coordinating multiple stakeholders in Nepal who had some portion of their projects working on water. How did you go about convincing them to work together in the name of water security? And what actions resonated most with them?
Hi, thanks, Jen. So to give you a little more perspective, to add on to what Alex already said, IWMA's objective was to improve water security in 2 targeted watersheds in Western Nepal through better coordination and integration of Usaid Nepal's Feed the Future environment and resilience projects. And as you touched on, getting buy-in was made a lot easier because all of the Usaid Nepal implementing partners involved in IWMA were working on different water uses to some degree, from irrigation to multiple use systems to disaster risk management. And the other reason was because IWMA had resounding support from Usaid Nepal's Social, Environmental, and Economic Development SEED office, which oversaw most of the implementing partners projects. Convincing actors to coordinate through a water security lens required a clear roadmap, strategic convening events, and a strong facilitator, which was IWMA. As far as what actions resonated with them, with the stakeholders, the water security integration activities resonated the most with implementing partners, Usaid Nepal SEED office, and local governments. These were collaborative interventions that built on synergies among implementing partners. IWMA facilitated 2 categories of integration activities: joint implementation and leveraging. Under joint implementation activities, 2 or more projects contributed technical or financial resources to jointly implement an activity intended to address 1 or more specific water security risk in the watershed. Leveraging activities involved knowledge sharing and data exchange between implementing partners, where compiled data or information from one project was used to inform activity design or implementation for 1 or more integration activities.
Great. And Liz, we have 1 minute. Can you give just a couple of examples of that leveraging?
Sure. I mean, there were a lot of connecting one implementing partner to another. It's hard not to get into all the names of all the projects, but one implementing partner had technical expertise in small-scale irrigation. So another implementing partner that was specializing in maternal care and 100-day mothers, essentially, was looking to have access to more water so that they could have garden plots to increase or to improve the health of these 100-day mothers, but they didn't have the technical expertise on how to even go about designing these irrigation systems. So they contacted this other implementing partner that was specializing in multiple use supply, and they ended up coming in and providing the technical expertise and even coordinating with the commune or the municipality to match funds. So a lot of, it seems really simple, but it was complicated getting these very siloed implementing partners to look beyond themselves.
That's a great example of the synergies that they were able to find between projects. Thank you, Liz. All right, we have 6 minutes for audience questions. Please don't be shy. Please go ahead and type your questions into the chat. We have 2 that have come up already. So panelists, the first question is, can you mention the best practices or lessons learned from involving the private sector in implementation of your activities? I realize I'm throwing this out to all 4 of you, so we just need to figure out who wants to go first. Maybe Liz, do you want to?
I could. Well, thank you, Jane. I think the best experience in involving the private sector, particularly our experience in the Mara, is the private sector were some of the biggest water users. As you know, Mara is a tourist destination, and there are so many hotels along the river, both in Kenya and Tanzania. And because their business survived on the availability of the water on the Mara to keep the wildlife going, it was important to them. And I'm sure in many basins where you have private sector users in the lines of food production, they would be interested. When we started, it was a bit scary for them because they thought whatever we were going to do, we were going to curtail the operations. But when we explained to them why you were there, and the interest was basically water security, to ensure that water continues to flow for the ecosystem, for production, and even for the wildlife, they became interested. And the best experience through their own initiative after this kind of introduction, they started a forum where they could speak together as hoteliers operating along the Mara River Basin. This was called Mara River Basin Hoteliers Forum. And here they would come and discuss issues. We were able also to engage with them on how they could enable the communities who live along the river to market some of the produce, because most of the hotels in the Mara, they buy food from Nairobi. And you were telling them, actually, you could work together with the communities around here and produce all the vegetables and the fruits that you need. And that picked up, but we were interrupted by COVID. We did not perfect it. But from what I hear is the hoteliers platform is still active and engaging with the water resources authorities and the community. So the priority really is the private sector are driven by, sometimes a bad word to say, but they are driven by profit. So if whatever you are talking about concerns their business, they would be interested. That was our experience in the Mara. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Clara, go ahead.
Thank you, sorry. So we had engagement with the private sector in 2 capacities. In terms of the partners, we had one private sector element, which was IBM research. And a bit like Gordon just mentioned, the private sector has one critical mission, which is to sort of make it self-sustainable, and the only way they can make it self-sustainable is through engaging in economic generating activities. In this case, it was quite different for IBM because they were not recipients of any funding, but they were actually givers of support. So we had access through them to specialized knowledge, both for our interns, a little bit for ourselves as well, to learn about big data, and then for the big training that we did online in 2020 and early 2020 on big data analytics and their use into the water sector. So we had a lot of benefits from there. And they also had benefits from us in the sense that they even changed their modality of understanding their internships. So whereas previously they would give priority to computer science students to access their internship program, now they're trying to merge the computer sciences with the sectoral knowledge, whether it is water, natural resources, or even health. So they recognize the need that when you do computer science and you're doing data analytics, you need to understand the sector in which you're doing the analytics. Otherwise, it becomes just data and statistics out of context. So that was a very important quid pro quo that we had for the process. And then we had the private sector as the research teams. As I mentioned before, we had 4 research proposals. 2 were led by universities. One was the University of the Western Cape, and the other one was the Witwatersrand University in Johannesburg. And then we had 2 private sector consulting firms. One was in Voto Africa, and the other one was Delta H. So the benefit of having that meant for us that we could balance the different approaches of handling research by the private sector versus the academic, because as an academic myself, I know that we are afforded a lot more visionary elements in our research. We can really go out there and think big about what we would like to achieve, what kind of assumptions we want to make, and what kind of research we would like to undertake. Whereas the consulting firms are very much grounded to making the most out of their money and not lose the pennies out of it against private sector operators. So we could balance the visionary aspect of the university engagement with the solid frameworking and sort of hard work of the consulting. Not that the academics didn't, but we, you know, if we hadn't had the university, we would never had a tryout as triangulating data collection, standardized data collection with qualitative questionnaire surveys with residents of a community, for instance. Had we not at a university, maybe we wouldn't have been able to do the geolocalization of big data sets given by remote sensing for the river basin. So we could have the best of both worlds, and that's a very big lessons learned. Try to engage with both. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Stakeholder engagement in water resources management can be an expensive and time-consuming process. How did the project manage this, and what did you put in place in terms of sustainability of stakeholder engagement beyond the project? So how did you keep the costs down, and how did you manage stakeholder engagement efficiently with respect to time? Benara, do you want to comment on this one from Cambodia? And you can unmute.
Hello. Hello. I'm sorry, Jen. I could not hear you from the beginning clearly.
Oh, okay. Yep. The question is, how did you manage stakeholder engagement in a way that kept the costs down, because it can be costly, and in a way that was efficient, because it can take a lot of time to do stakeholder engagement in water resources management?
Yeah. Thank you. Here in the Stockholm River Basin, you know, to engage the stakeholder with limited budget, and you know that we experienced so far. First of all, we had to identify the key stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders? Who are the primary stakeholders, and who are the secondary stakeholders? And if we identify this kind of a range of stakeholders, we can try to have some capacity building, or how to connect, and how to deal with them, how to approach them, and working with them more effectively.
So part of the effort was to really target which stakeholders you were going to engage by clearly identifying them at the outset. Does anyone else have thoughts on this?
I have something to say. Hi, Jen. So I actually also worked on the Cambodia activity, and I just kind of wanted to give my 2 cents about the sustainability of our stakeholder engagement approach. And that was that we worked a lot with the local provincial departments that work with water to not convince them, but to, I guess, convince them that stakeholder engagement and we developed technical working groups that were supposed to be kind of an advisory capacity to the River Basin Management Committee. But kind of through those technical working groups, we helped the provincial departments to see the value of including the stakeholders and hearing directly from stakeholders about their problems and how it's a more direct way to address water security risks when you're keeping these people engaged. And so now these working groups have transitioned from being under SWP to being underneath the River Basin Management Committee, and they are now led by the corresponding provincial department. And they're going to convene them just as we did. I'm optimistic about it.
Thanks, Liz. Very helpful. Okay, so that closes our first audience question session, and we're going to move on with one more round of questions to each panelist. So next, I'm going to start with Gordon again. There you are, Gordon. So far, we've talked about a couple of different aspects of stakeholder engagement, which is one key to the success of water security initiatives. Another essential aspect to make robust decisions and propose solutions on water security is access to data and the ability to present the data in ways that it can support water security plans and actions. So Gordon, in the MARA, how did you go about acquiring data or accessing enough data to support SWP's interventions? And do you have any lessons learned or tips for other practitioners about data collection and analysis? Gordon, are you hearing us okay? Oh, are you able to unmute? I'm not sure Gordon is hearing me, so I'm going to throw the same question to Clara. We'll start with you. How did you go about acquiring and or accessing sufficient data in the big data project?
Well, I'm lucky I didn't have to personally, but our research teams did, and they were quite successful with it. So they came across some myths about data collection and some verifiable truths about data collection in Southern Africa. But before I go into that, let me just reiterate the fact that the real drive for the work of the collaboration was really revolving around big data. And given what we understand, generally speaking, about big data being big amounts of data, we were really wondering and trying to figure out whether we could do such a thing. We could use a big data approach in Southern Africa, where notably everybody complains that there is not enough data. Everybody complains that there are difficulty in obtaining data. So we wanted to see if by using big data analytics we could support new methods of data collection, data generation, harmonization. That's why we work transboundary across the transboundary aquifer, and then different kind of usage in decision making for the management of the aquifer. So, like I said, we had some assumptions. We assumed that there was not enough data. We assumed that there was not applied method of standardized data collection, making harmonization quite difficult. We also assumed that data was dispersed across different collectors, so academic, private sector, government, and other agencies that maybe had done a project for a donor organization at some point in the past, but nobody really knows if there was a generated depository and storage solution for that data that could be accessible. And also we assumed that the river basin organizations in Southern Africa, and we were working under the Limpopo Commission, did not really have either the human or financial resources to act as repository for data. So there is no central, we assume that there was no centralized space to ask for data. And those assumptions were mostly confirmed. So luckily, we were working with research teams that had a history of water data collection in the region, so they pretty much knew where to go. and we had the government as partners in the collaboration, so they would be approachable and able to give us information. We also learned, for instance, that some data you have to pay for. So, for instance, for South Africa, the weather service, if you want to triangulate with climate change, you have to be able to pay for it because the data is not freely and cost effectively available, actually for free. So that was a problem at the beginning. And then as the research team started to experiment with using big data analytics approaches, especially when the interns started to work with the IBM experts, we realized that data collection, when you're talking about big data analytics, can be different. So you might not have to go with the traditional having to go to a borehole every month or every week or every day and get the data collection on water quality, water quantity, and what have you. You don't have to maybe go to the farmers and find out how many millimeters of rain they had in the past week, for instance. There are different ways. Maybe they're not as precise as that kind of data collection, but given the fact that we don't have the resources to do that kind of labor-intensive collection, maybe they can provide some respite and still help in the management. And so we also learned that water data can be triangulated with other large data sets, like the one taken from satellite imagery, but also, as I mentioned before, by people's perspective. So we can, through algorithms, have a look at what people think about water quality and water quantity in their area and see if that's verifiable against the government data, for instance, and if it reflects any other climate pattern, if we have access to the information thereof. And what we also found out throughout direct engagement with government partners, but also by participating into a variety of events like the SADC Groundwater Conference or the WISA, the Water Institute of Southern Africa conference earlier this year, or late in 2020, that this is the time in which almost everybody, from people in national governments, people that work for transboundary river management institutions, people that work for donor agencies, people that work for research agencies, be they public, academia, or private, want to share data. They don't want to just keep their data and sit on it, but they want to share it so they can also access other people's data and make their research way more valuable. So the problem is that we don't know how to do it, or not until now. And the other question is, where would it be stored? Who would be taking responsibility of holding such a data storage facility, and how secure it could be to address all of the sensitive issues about data ownerships that countries normally have, and sometimes even private sector. So we learned throughout this engagement that was sometimes very much planned and sometimes more haphazardly put together through just meeting people when we still used to have face-to-face interactions, that the time is very ripe for creating something that supports data sharing in our region, that is able to bring together both public and private institutions and set up an example for others to follow, other institutions or also other sectors to follow in sharing data and making therefore research much more viable and much more useful to decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. There's a lot of great information there, and I think much of that is written up in SWP big data case studies, which you can find on the SWP site.
I would like to add something, Jen, if you can hear me now.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I think as we've seen, our experience in the Mara basically taught us that water security success depends on two things. One is political, which can be addressed by effective stakeholders engagement. And the other aspect is the technical. And the core at the technical issues at the water resources management at basin level is the data. We had a lot of challenges in the Mara in terms of accessing data because this is a transboundary river shared by Kenya and Tanzania. And the fact that there were no existing protocols for data sharing, each country was suspicious on what we were going to use with the data. And the biggest problem is data did not exist. Good data did not exist. Some of the data that was collecting, especially on river flow gauges, the way it was handled was not very good. And in some cases, the configuration of the hydrographs had not been done properly. So data was definitely a challenge. So what we learned, we had to institute a lot of case studies and also used a lot of projection on old data that we could come across to be able to arrive at the current status. Particularly, we faced a lot of challenges when we were doing resource availability assessment as we went doing the water allocation planning on the Lower Mara Basin. Sometimes we had to use some gauging stations that were very far and relating them to the situation where we are, and also using research institutions, particularly the fact that we are working together with IHE Delft. Some of their students had worked on the Mara and the data that became useful. So when looking for data, look far and wide. The other experience we had was also, which has also been mentioned by Clara, is the indigenous knowledge. What people understood about their river, and getting that indigenous knowledge and translating it into technical information that you can use. So the real challenges are really effective data collection from our experience, effective data collection, analyzing that data to generate information that can be used by people. And then the other aspect is the data storage, the repository. Where do you take it after you've done the analysis and generated information out of it? I think that's a big challenge and was lacking. It challenged us throughout the project. So I think even at national level, there should exist a protocol for data release and data sharing. And especially if it's a transboundary river, there should be a shared protocol on where data is kept and how it can be shared and who has the authority to give it. In our case, we had the advantage of working closely with the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, and we went under the East African Community protocols to access data where it was available through Lake Victoria Basin Commission. So the key lessons that we learned is indigenous knowledge is critical, and use it to get the information you want and translating that indigenous knowledge into technical. And also look wide. We worked with institutions that had already had some data, and now you analyzing that data and translating it to get what you want. But on top of it, on core, really there needs to be a protocol for data sharing, and where is the data stored? How is it collected? How to generate information? And that is a skill that we found was still lacking in most of the institutions. Effective data collection, analyzing that data, generating information out of it, and storing it, what people would call knowledge management. And that is critical in terms of decision making. In the Mara River Basin and in all the East African community countries, water users apply for water permits, and water is allocated to them according to what is available. If that data is not accurate, there is normally over-allocation. And these overallocations are the ones that result into conflicts among users. Because probably, I could give a rough example that you have only 1 million cubic meters available, but you've allocated 1.5 million cubic meters. So definitely people will get into conflict. And the reason why you can get in that kind of overallocation is lack of data. So those are some of the experiences that we came across. Thank you.
I think it's really interesting that even though these are vastly different projects, both the Big Data project and the Mara project found the value of triangulating data with people's perceptions or with indigenous knowledge. That's a really interesting finding. All right, we're winding down on our panel time. I want to just do two very quick questions, one to Liz and one to Benara, in order to close out here. So Liz, I'm gonna ask you first. So through the plans that were approved under IWMA, what are some key concrete water resource management activities that were proposed and implemented? And just very quickly, how were they chosen and agreed by the stakeholders?
Okay, so IWMA worked with 10 implementing partners to develop comprehensive integration plans for the Rangoon Kola and Lower Karnali watersheds. Each integration plan included an analysis of the water-related risks faced in each watershed, They discussed each implementing partner's ongoing activities in the watersheds and their relation to water security issues, listed agreed upon opportunities for integration, delineated specific implementation roles and responsibilities for each implementing partner, and presented an expected timeline for implementation. So each integration and MEL plan presented a roadmap for implementing partners to work together towards improving water security. IWMA itself did not directly implement any integration activities, but facilitated their identification, development, monitored their progress, and communicated their lessons learned to the consortium. In total, there were 5 water security integration activities that were planned and 8 were completed. So once we got on a roll, it really started happening. To give you an example, during development of a municipal master plan, Haryaban 2, an implementing partner, requested that Pani, another implementing partner, develop an inexpensive flood early warning system and installed it in a nearby river that had flooded in 2015 and 2018, adversely affecting the local communities. Pani completed the request, but it didn't have enough funds to conduct the capacity building to complement that work for the flood impacted communities the system was intended to help. So Haryaban 2 stepped in and supported training events in 2 communities with technical expertise and funding. The 2 implementing partners therefore combined their resources to make communities more flood resilient. I suggest that if you liked hearing about that integration activity, that you read the IWMA case study or the final report. They're both available on swpwater.org and the SWP Global Waters microsite.
Great, thank you for that plug. That's another reminder that there's just a lot of really great information about everything that we've discussed today that's been written up. I want to end to Banara with a question about the strategic action plan that was created in Cambodia. Can you tell us just very briefly? We have to sort of shorten this answer to maybe just 1 minute. I think I'm going to just cover what that plan was. So the objective was to promote sustainable development in the Stockholm Basin with particular emphasis on water security and protection of biodiversity. And establish mechanisms for institutional coordination, data management, knowledge sharing, and very importantly, inclusive participation of all the actors in the basin. The SAP, the Strategic Action Plan, presents targeted, scalable water security actions and outlines actions to strengthen the capacity of the Stockholm River Basin Management Committee and its members, defines potential funding sources and monitoring and evaluation procedures. So it was a huge achievement of the Cambodia SWP activity. And Banara, can you tell us a bit about how you've facilitated stakeholders to develop this plan? And also, what are you optimistic about looking into the future in terms of the sustainability of this plan? And can you unmute, Banara?
Yeah, okay. Something not pretty well now. Yeah, thank you very much. As you know, here in the Stockholm River Basin, we established a River Basin Management Committee with the member representative from technical line department, from the district representative, from the commune and the community representative, and with support from the SWP task force to selected by the secretariat of the River Basin Management Committee, led the development of the strategy action plan. Of course, there was not a single meeting of strategy action plan development, but there was a series of consultation meetings with community members and the secretariat coordinated by River Basin Management Committee Task Force. And the purpose was to present and to discuss the objective prepare the final outline, agree on priority action, and validate the final draft of the strategic action plan. And at the beginning, the task force member was so apprehensive about the iterative and the transparent process that SWP recommended for developing strategy action plan. But eventually, SWP and the Secretariat received a lot of positive comment about how the participatory planning process was very effective and did a good job of capturing so many opinions. Finally, the task force concluded and presented the strategy action plan to the committee chair for approval, which was received on December 27, 2020, and end of the January 2021, strategy action plan has been launched officially and distributed to a wide range of stakeholders outside and also inside and also outside the Stockholm River Basin. So for the future hope that I can see, the river basin management. As I knew that the river basin management chair and as well as the vice chair are very committed to support the strategic action plan in the Stockholm River Basin. So I personally do hope that other donors, agencies, and development partner in the basin will contribute more or less their funding to continue support strategic action plan implementation on the ground. And the second, the most important for me is the integration the strategic action plan into the commune district development plan as well as institutional plan. It is part of strategy action plan sustainability for the Stockholm River Basin Management Committee. And as you hear from Lee, we have 6 working group under the need of the River Basin Management Committee in the Stockholm River Basin, and I can see that they will be active to provide concrete action on the ground to support the strategic action plan implementation. And I also do hope that the commune district authority will allocate appropriate funding to support strategic action plan implementation in their respective areas. That's what I can see from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. I think that's all the time we have, and I'll hand it back to Nicola.
Thank you very much, Clara, Liz, Gordon, Bunara, and Jen for facilitating this very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. In this next part, I am hoping that you see my screen. It should work, yes. I would like to come back in more details about some of the tools that have been mentioned several times in this discussion on thought leadership products developed by SWP. The first one, the core product, as Alex mentioned earlier, is the WSI process, the Water Security Improvement Process, WSI, represents a series of steps that builds on the capacity of stakeholders to address the water security risks in a specific geographic area, such as a basin, a subcatchment. And WSI is built around 5 steps after an inception phase to confirm the demand and feasibility, to ensure governmental and financial support, and to kick off the process formally. This step could lead to the initial declaration of intent, a MOU, for example, and then we move on to the steps per se. So step 1 defines the WSI space by identifying the actors and the geographic area, the key water risk, and the time scale for the plan. The second step will then require assessing water security risks by conducting technical, socioeconomic, governance, risk studies to understand the current and likely future water security conditions. In step 3, we will plan for water security activities, and that includes how to fund them. This will be done by defining, analyzing, comparing, and selecting the relevant activities and drawing an action plan to reach targets and securing financing for implementation. Step 4 is the implementation of water activities that target the priority water risk and provide tangible benefits to the water users. Concurrently, a step to monitor the progress of implementation needs to be considered, building the adaptive capacity of all actors and adjusting activities as needed, as well as to continue engaging stakeholders with transparent results. The WSI is iterative and is meant to be regularly repeated as stakeholders become more comfortable working together and over time expands its scope and its scale. Each of those steps is described in a series of practical manuals that we call the Wsi Toolkit Series. And some key features are fundamental to implementing an effective and sustainable WSI process. Stakeholder engagement has been discussed at large. Gender and social inclusion consideration are very important as well. Transparent communication, decision-making procedures. A focus on priority water security risks within a target geography. Evidence-based decision-making, accounting for uncertainty in the future as well, and adaptive management and learning. A final point is the engagement of private sector and the public. While working on the WSI process, SWP used a number of surveys, assessments, models, and tools on specific aspects of water resources, such as hydrologic conditions, or to build consensus with stakeholders based on data and uncertainty. These are some of the guidance produced by the project, tested in the field conditions in the Mara Basin or in Cambodia, and they can be used in different contexts. For example, we have a manual on environmental flows or analytical tools for decision-making. SWP also has a template and brief guidance about assessing the capacity of institutions around water security. Another major work of SWP was the recent publication of 18 technical briefs that detail water resources management and risks for the 18 high-priority countries identified in USAID's Water for the World Act. Each country profile is in this series presents information on water resources, water quality, and water-related dimensions of climate change and water governance. They provide an overview of the most critical challenges and stress factors on water resources, including various maps and data points. A very interesting webinar was held specifically on this topic in July earlier this year. If you've missed it, it is available for viewing on the SWP website. The Eco Game Water Security was developed as part of Winrocks International's Eco Games suite. This series of serious games propose engaging and fun ways for adults and youth alike to learn and to reflect on how their decisions impact water security. It's a board game that is hands-on education and planning tool that helps stakeholders examine the intersections of natural resources management, community development, and uncertainty. A version tailored to Cambodia's Tun Chinit Basin was developed and translated into Khmer. In this version, each team of players represent a community in rural Cambodia. Players must make decisions on water and land uses that balance community well-being and watershed environmental sustainability. These decisions impact overall resilience as well as gains and losses of income and water resources through a set of cash and water tokens. And the player or the team with the most tokens after a number of rounds wins the game. As part of the WSI step on assessing water security conditions, SWP used and supported the upgrade of a number of open source tools from our partners. Winrock International's Wsi Tool is an online web-based planning software developed to support decision makers by applying water modeling, satellite imagery, and local data to estimate expected changes in water availability, sediment, nutrient loss, and greenhouse gas emissions. Wsi tool was in particularly used in Cambodia with the training of provincial government staff, allowing them to assess water security risks across various spatial scales. SEI's WEAP, the Water Evaluation and Planning System, is a user-friendly software that takes an integrated approach to water resources planning. It incorporates issues of water supply and demand, quality, ecological consideration, and it supports the allocation of limited water resources between agricultural, municipal, and environmental users. WEAP's a practical yet robust tool for integrated water resources planning. WEAP models were developed by SEI for the Cambodia and the Mara pilot projects, with findings used to inform those strategic action plans. Aqueduct Tools by the World Resources Institute map water risks such as floods, droughts, and stress using open source peer-reviewed data. Their latest iteration of Aqueduct offers a robust look at water risks to date with many improved functions and access to hydrological models. Aqueduct was used by SWP on country profiles and for various desk studies for Usaid missions. mWater Surveyor's app and portal was also used in Cambodia and in the Mara in different capacities. In the Mara Basin, mWater provided mobile survey tools to conduct groundwater abstraction survey. It was done by the staff of the Lake Victoria Basin Water Board, identifying 500 water points, including some from users not yet registered for an abstraction permit that mentioned Gordon earlier. That was a revenue loss for the water board. mWater Surveyor app was also used in the Stunkshinit Basin for a water quality sampling campaign. Finally, SWP published a number of case studies, training courses, and technical reports providing rich information of data analysis and lessons learned throughout its pilot projects discussed earlier in Cambodia, Tanzania, Kenya, Nepal, or Southern Africa, among others. More documents will be added to this list in the coming weeks as we're compiling all the documents and knowledge produced during the project. And they are published and available on SWP's website, as well as on WindWorks' website and USAID's Global Waters. Now, I would like to invite our next speakers who will discuss how this learning from SWP should shape water security in the future. This next panel will be introduced and facilitated by Dr. Basil Mahaney. Dr. Mahaney is the Deputy Director of SWP through Tetra Tech. Dr. Mahaney was the Technical Activity Manager for SWP's pilot activity in the Mara River Basin, and he has overseen SWP's thought leadership, including the country profiles. He's a water governance and water security specialist with 10 years of experience working in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and South America. Dr. Mahaney has a PhD in Geography, Environment, and Society from the University of Minnesota. Basil, I will let you introduce the panelists.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicolas. I just want to confirm everybody can hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be located. It is my pleasure to host our second panel discussion in this closeout event. The presentations by Alex and Nicolas in the first panel discussion really highlighted how water security is really at its core a cross-cutting issue. And one thing that stands out for me from the first panel is that we have to consider water security within the local context. And even within local context, we have to understand how conditions and circumstances change. This is why iteration matters. We have to be able to test and learn and adapt. Related, we need clear visions and definitions for what water security means and pragmatic approaches and solutions for getting there. This requires that we have good information and data and the resources and skills to use the data effectively. In this session, we'll reflect on some of these points and more with a great group of panelists who bring different institutional perspectives and experiences from around the world. Our panelists will reflect on some of their experiences within SWP, and I will also share some of my own insights as well. but also beyond as we collectively discuss the future of water security. We have a lot of information and experience on what works and what doesn't, but the context of our work continue to evolve, especially with climate change. Our first speaker, Dr. Alison Macillati, is a Senior Water Security Advisor at Usaid Washington Center for Water Security, Sanitation, and Hygiene, where she has served as the Usaid Activity Manager for the Sustainable Water Partnership. In her role, she also provides technical support to Usaid mission water and sanitation programming in a number of countries across Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and recently led the development of a research agenda to support water and sanitation programming. Prior to joining Usaid, she was a program officer with the National Academy of Sciences, where she worked with the Board on Atmospheric Sciences and Climate. She holds a PhD in Geography and Global Change from the University of Minnesota and a Master's in Forestry from the Yale School of Environment. Our second speaker, Mr. Toriro Davison Saruchera, is the coordinator of the water program for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Eastern and Southern Africa region, IUCN ISARO. He is a water resources management specialist with interests in water governance, capacity building, and community participation. He has 15 years of experience addressing issues around water policy and institutions, water cooperation, livelihoods, and irrigation water management in national and international basins of Southern Africa. Toriro has worked in different capacities in the water sector, including project management, research, project consulting, advocacy, and stakeholder engagement. Toriro holds a master's degree in integrated water resources management from the University of Western Cape, a master's degree in environmental studies from the University of Pretoria. He has also completed a postgraduate diploma in water and sanitation development from the Institute of Water and Sanitation Development. And last, Dr. Marisa Escobar is the Water Program Director at the Stockholm Environment Institute, US, based in the Davis office. Her work focuses on examining and creating linkages between physical processes and socio-ecological systems. She uses her expertise on water, including water quality, the physics of water, and the movement of water through watersheds, and tools like SEI's Swpp tool to produce information on the implications of decisions about water on the overall ecosystem. Her geographic focus is California, where she resides, and Latin America, where she is from. Marisa has a PhD in hydrologic sciences from the University of California at Davis. The first question, I think, is probably one of the more important questions and one that we are encountering increasingly in the news every single day around the world, and that has to do with climate change. Climate change has introduced a lot of uncertainty into water management planning. In many places, future uncertainty is compounded by a lack of data and information on surface and groundwater. From your experiences, how can we effectively overcome these information gaps and increasing uncertainty to achieve water security today and in the future? Marisa, I'll begin with you because I know this is a really important part of the robust decision support frameworks that SEI is involved with and the use of the Swpp tool.
Absolutely, thank you very much. First, I want to start with a reflection of all the things we've been discussing today and how all of these water security aspects and roadmaps that you have been developing in this project and that you are putting out to the public here and through all the information that you've been sharing really adds to the SDG 6 and the agenda that is being charted in terms of achieving some of the goals globally, right? These goals really are looking for drinking water, sanitation, hygiene, looking at water management, transboundary issues, ecosystems, and cooperation, among others. And I feel that the work that the project has really tackled is that roadmap to get there through all these steps and how we really start. So I feel like that's a very important aspect. And of course, under these uncertain conditions and how climate is affecting all the local situation and all the local planning, having such roadmap is very important. Now, I think the question, now that we have the roadmap, the key question is how do we implement it, right? Now we know the what, the how, I think is what's very clear here that is needed. And I think that for that we need to make the existing data more accessible and generate more data to improve models and data analytics. We heard from Clara and others how there's been a lot of data put out there, but how do we use that data? I think making it available through models. We will never have all the data available to complete all the models, but we can at least start with the data we have, develop conceptual models, and start tackling these issues. Of course, climate data comes here, and we need to get the best sense of what those future projections are and add that to the models and start identifying the key strategies that can be, prepare systems for water security. Now, this plays at different scales, right? We have the global data and the global climate affecting the local situation, but also if we dig deeper into the more community level situation, this is where we need to start looking at some of the other dynamics that happen and how we engage those stakeholders and how we bring those voices to the table. In this study, and in particular in the Cambodia case study, my colleagues, Anel Huberly, Brian Joyce, and Laura Forney really dug deeper into this question. And again, this requires effort, this requires time, but we were able to dig deeper through surveys, household surveys, and identify what are the gender and equality dynamics that are happening at that level. So we could put that data back into these models and then identify solutions that target those specific issues. So for example, we found that the upstream, downstream dynamics were very important, and that some of the stakeholders were not getting the water, and that some of the strategies that are defined at the high level really don't go deeper into what the communities specifically need. So I think that was an important aspect. And of course, gender plays out here very clearly, and how female voices, when they are brought to the table, they bring a more diverse aspect and set of solutions that many times are really helpful to identify those actions that are needed for climate adaptation. And so I'm going to leave it there for now, but I think this is a very important point and we need to continue talking about it.
Okay, thank you, Marissa. Tamara, I'll turn to you. From your experiences, how have you, what sorts of approaches or methods have you used to deal with these information gaps, and what lessons learned have stood out?
Thank you, Bezo, and a very good afternoon to everyone online from Pretoria. The experience that we have in this region actually is mostly centered around the acquisition and the usage of data itself. You find that in many instances, you do not have a systematic way of actually collecting, storing, and sharing data around water, both at a national and at an international level. So from our work that we do here, one of the aims of our work in transboundary and national water management situations, from a governance perspective, is that we support as much as possible the institutionalization of the data needs. So what do I mean by institutionalizing that? The first thing is there must be a deliberate and systematic effort to actually collect and store data. And this effort must actually come all the way from central government, going all the way down to the basin. And it must not only happen when there's a drought or a flood or there's an anticipated risk, but something that must be going on, actually warehouse this data and make it available even for other people outside the water sector. For example, researchers, your private sector, community radios, and so forth. And the second part of institutionalizing data is to agree on some parameters or some frameworks that you need to really build and collect data on. We have a lot of situations where data may be collected in 2 or 3 neighboring states, but it's totally different. And because serving different needs, the effort to actually harmonize it when it comes to transboundary water governance actually creates another layer of complexity that doesn't really help the situation. And so this is one of the areas where we try to work a lot. In Southern Africa, we have a colonial legacy. So countries have have different former colonial powers, and they've all inherited different ways of doing things, from education to measurement to basic metrics. So something as little as that can actually really make things very difficult for everyone else. And the third thing that we try to do in institutionalizing data needs is to then build capacity to make sure that the data is collected. So you're talking about the human capacity and also the technical part of it. So this is one of the biggest challenges we have here. And in as much as we are making efforts together with other international cooperating partners, this is a journey we are really still traveling. But the ultimate aim is when we can collect data or collect information, we have repositories that can be shared across boundaries. We can then now come up with a very easy and efficient communication strategy where this data now can be turned into useful information that can be fed to different communities in respectable languages and responding to felt needs in each community. This is what will actually make, water security initiatives really mitigate climate change in our case. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Terrell. Ali, I'll turn to you. You're on mute. Still mute. Can somebody help unmute Ali? Try now.
I think it should be good now. Yeah, I was muted by the organizer. Apologies. Yes, I just before I respond to the other panelists and to the question, I just wanted to say it's a pleasure to be here as part of this closeout event, and thanks all of you for joining and listening into some of the lessons that we've learned from SWP over the past 5 years. I think I want to build on that first part of the question and talk to some of the experiences with SWP that have helped us address these deep uncertainties that come with climate change, and also with changes in demographic, water demand, changes in economic growth, et cetera, land use. So I think it's easy to say that we know that we can no longer use these 5-year planning horizons for water resources management. We can't rely on things like 50-year, 100-year, 500-year floods or droughts to be able to plan anymore, because I think even as we've experienced this summer here in the United States and elsewhere, these events that used to happen only every 100 years or 500 years, they're becoming kind of the new normal. So we know we need different approaches to modeling, to planning, in order to incorporate these changes in our climate into our water resources planning. And that's really one of the main challenges, is to be able to address those uncertainties. And so I think the experience, and Marisa, you spoke to this some, and also we heard from Benara and Gordon in the other panel about experiences with WEEP and robust decision support and participatory approaches that they take into account the data we don't have, the understanding that we might not know from the models and from the data that we do have, in order to develop scenarios that stakeholders can then iterate on and find some solutions that are more robust, both to climate change, but also to other changes that we might not be able to have perfect data to inform. So I guess it's not just WEEP and RDS, but I think the experience with SWP has allowed some of at least our missions within Usaid to experience working in that sort of different space with water resource management planning that incorporates climate uncertainty and other uncertainty, and is really grounded in that stakeholder participation, which brings new information and data and perspectives that we wouldn't normally in that kind of traditional water resources management approach have been able to capture. And I think we're seeing that kind of framework for water resources management. We're getting more experience with it, and not just through WEEP and robust decision support, but also through approaches like CREDA or CRIDA that's promoted by UN and others. That we have some activities, for example, in the Dominican Republic that are using shared vision planning, which the Army Corps of Engineers is working on, and some of the framework is kind of the same, that we need to incorporate uncertainty and try to find solutions together that are robust to those uncertainties that we have. And I guess I just want to add one other thing on data. I mean, it's clear that we've underinvested in data, and that's not something that's a surprise to anyone in the sector. But And it came out very, very strongly in SWP's profile series, especially our lack of understanding on groundwater resources. And that's not a problem that's gonna be fixed overnight. And so I think we need to be thinking about governance and finance and ways to take better governance and turn that back into more sustainable investments in data collection and data management systems. And I think the experience with the water security improvement process, where this has to be an iterative approach. We can't get all the perfect data in the first go around and create the perfect water allocation plan. I mean, this has to be an iterative approach. And sometimes the modeling that we do in the first rounds can help us identify the best investments to make in data and data collection as processes move forward. So I think I'll stop there, but yeah, I'm curious to hear any reflections again from Marisa or Toriro on some of those points.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, Marisa, and Toriro. I mean, these are all, I think, really interesting points, and definitely see threads across them. I mean, two specific points that stand out for me, and I think really came through in SWP's work, is the role of stakeholders sort of on the ground. We might lack access to data, or might lack good data that's available to us for informed planning. But oftentimes the communities are sort of at the front lines of what's changing in the basin or the watershed, and they can shed a lot of really valuable light on what's happening, and we can use that information and for better planning. And I think the example from Cambodia and the wheat planning and the use of the household surveys and the focus groups, I think really illustrates that. For those who are interested, it was a paper that was actually published. It just came out in July, and the publication was Water, if anyone's interested in reading more. And then Toriro, you made a point about the sort of the frameworks that are used for sort of the design of institutions, and oftentimes that these tie back to sort of colonial mandates. And we often think about the world as sort of a colonial, post-colonial world, but those decisions 100 years ago still continue to impact today. And it's really important, I think, sort of using in contemporary language, the political economy of what's happening, and how institutional mandates affect how information is collected. So one of the things that stands out from the profile is that when information is collected, it's oftentimes collected by different institutions and it's not consistently shared, or they collect it using different metrics and frameworks, and that's within a country. And when you start thinking about this sort of at a transboundary level, it becomes even more complicated. And this was one of the things where we encountered as we were engaging sort of the Kenyan and the Tanzanian governments, of how can we come to look at sort of a shared set of information and data and facts for improved management of the basin. I want to transition into the next question, and this I think continues the conversation and builds on a point that Ali was making around governance. I mean, in many places, basin managers and sector staff know what they need to do. They understand that they need to be collecting, data and information, issuing permits, managing those permits, collecting permit fees. But they aren't able to do them because there's gaps in staffing, gaps in financial resources, and in many cases, gaps in or lack of capacity. And looking to the future, what steps should we be taking consider taking to make governance strengthening efforts more sustainable? And I know this is a core focus for Usaid. So Ali, maybe I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Toriro and then Marisa.
Yeah, thanks very much, Basil. I think it does build nicely off of the previous question. I think you're right. I mean, water resources management, water security, it's fundamentally a governance challenge. And I think building the capacity of water resource management institutions and water service providers and other institutions that contribute to water resources management and water security, it's definitely, it's a long-term investment, but it's something that we need to continue because it's really essential to solving the challenges that Jeff kind of started out with in his introductory remarks, the kind of overwhelming, what sometimes seem like overwhelming challenges with water insecurity that are growing in the future. And I think I mean, I think I'd like to maybe point to one SWP experience to kind of get the conversation going on this topic, because I think it offers some important illustrations of how you make investments into capacity building and governance more sustainable. I mean, I think so often we're overwhelmed by the finance gaps, which, you know, part of this question is about, you know, the lack of funding, the lack of staff. And in the MARA, SWP's work to conduct abstraction surveys. So basically, it was not well characterized who was using water in the basin. And I think there was an assumption before that work started that you know, there wasn't a willingness to pay for that water and to invest back into the resource management that helps us to ensure that the resource base is sustainably managed. But that actually didn't turn out to be the case. Once the abstraction survey was there and MWater, a partner of SWP, worked to make that survey easy for the basin management organization, we saw that revenue generation kind of followed very, very smoothly from there. So that's one step, is just you know, not always assuming that there's not a willingness to pay for water and to finance water resources management, but you know, enabling basin management organizations to do their job of collecting those fees, make it easier. And then, but the second thing there is then you have money, but often you find that there's not necessarily good budget execution. And I think you know, that's sort of the next step, I think, for work in the Mara Basin is ensuring that increased revenue collection is actually you know, able to be spent back on water resources management in a timely enough way that funding doesn't get captured by other priorities. And you know, I think having really good plans, like SWP also worked on in the Mara, is important for making sure that budget execution part happens. And then, you know, you hope that just builds on itself. And you know, obviously there are a ton of other gaps in terms of staffing and human resources, and you know, capacity building in other areas. But I think you know, that's an example that I think points to a bit of a way forward, but also just recognizing that it's a long-term investment, and we can't expect that these things are going to be solved in a 5-year activity.
Yeah, for sure. Toriro?
Yeah, when you look at governance, actually the interesting thing, talking a bit of reflection from my experience, is I think the rationale behind you know, the actors, you know, actions within a basin, and even, you know, the regulators is understood. It's something that is well known, whether they're talking about access to resource, whether they're talking about water cooperation itself. The rationale is well understood and everyone knows why it should happen. But when it comes to actual practice on the ground, what actually triggers, you know, the cooperation or the conflict then becomes different. And this is something that is not nuanced enough in the work that, I mean, in what gets to be written around. So to me, when I look at this, I always say governance to some extent is a very local issue. And in a basin, the structure with and the power relations between a basin management authority and provincial or central government really needs to be thought through. What we see here in Southern Africa is we have a centralized government system that then runs you know, the National River Basin Organizations. Is some subordinates that actually report to central government. And to me, when I look at that and realize that there's close to zero autonomy on the basin management agency itself, whether it's on revenue collection, whether it's enacting bylaws, whether it's on policing, you know, some economic tools that are very necessary, like polluter pays principle, payment of ecosystem services and so forth, is something that has to be ratified way above them. So this creates a gap in that the people who really know what should be done and the people who say what should be done then have different viewpoints. So the first stage will actually be to close this gap and kind of give at least some technical autonomy to the basin management agency, because that's where things are actually happening. That's where they actually need to react to things very quickly. And when I look at this, one big issue then that comes into play is the financing part. And when the local management, basin management authority does not really have, the means, the finance that they can actually make decisions on, it means whatever they plan to do really depend on who believes them way up the hierarchy. And we have been trying to get one little pilot study around this in one of the countries in Southern Africa. At least on this one, I can't really mention the name. Then there was a lot of agreement on the discussion table. But when we started, we realized that this was going to be very difficult because you still get the politically invested actions coming in. And to me, that again becomes a big challenge. But when I look at this, I always think that, a basin management agency at whatever level should be able to collect revenue that really owes its operations for at least 60%. This is my theory, I'm still to prove it. But yeah, because what happens is whatever is collected then is remitted to a consolidated revenue fund that goes elsewhere. Then they get bits and pieces on a budget. And this makes it difficult for them to actually respond to anything. But if this money comes to them, then they're actually able to quickly respond to needs. And then, well, a certain amount can be left to go whatever. But from the rates, from the levies, from the fines, if they can take and, enact certain governance systems that make sure that the money is really managed in a certain way. To me, that is one of the best ways of getting certain things done quickly and efficiently than what we currently see in most of the situations obtaining where we were. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, before I turn to Marissa, I actually want to add, this is precisely one of the lessons we had from our work in the MARA around this, the abstraction survey using the mWater tool. By identifying all of these new water users, in addition to previously registered water users, but their permits had expired, there was a windfall of revenue that they were able to generate. However, those funds go back to the central ministry as a part of the budgeting cycle. What's exciting is this specific survey received a lot of attention from the ministry, and the other basin water boards within Tanzania expressed interest, and through the other Usaid flagship project at the time, Moridi, there was some preliminary support to pilot this survey as well. And so hopefully, this is another key lesson from SWP is as you're implementing the water security improvement process and you're working at these local scales, always thinking about how can these interventions also be scaled up so that you're thinking at sort of a basin or regional, even sort of national scales. Marissa, I'll turn to you with some additional thoughts on from your perspective.
Yeah, again, it's a gathering all of these thoughts and making them like a package of good ideas, and the iterative nature of this process and how it goes from the basin management to the national level to the global level, and then at that level of the basin management down to the communities, and how we need to do that vertical integration of all these different actors playing out in different moments, in terms of how to make all of these resources more available and what to do to make them more directly tackle the issues. This funding, for example, in this case that was gathered through this mechanism, and any other funding, it really needs to go directly to the climate adaptation in the water sector. And going back to the first question, climate uncertainties, they used to be uncertainties, now they're becoming certainties, right? As Ali was saying, they're happening more often and every year. So it's not about keeping these things for the future and making an investment that will happen in 5 years, 10 years. It needs to happen now, because we're going to continue to see the droughts, the floods, and the fires every year. So I believe, through some of these analysis that we've done, we know what are those strategies that need to be implemented. I think just this direct connection between the funding and the climate adaptation actions need to happen, and need to happen now. I feel like there's another connection that can happen to the sectors, the other sectors, the multi-sector nature of water, you know, and how it contributes to the overall economy, wherever it is, you know, even if it's tourism, you know, we need to invest in keeping the water, for example, in the Mara Basin for the ecosystems. That needs to happen, otherwise we won't have that tourism, and of course we lose that biodiversity. Where there's hydropower, where there's agriculture, all of these sectors need to be connected to those investments and continue to contribute to this climate adaptation. Those are my thoughts now.
Thank you, Marissa. I have just a quick follow-up question. You know, thinking about the funding gap, but then also sort of the stakeholders across. I mean, one thing that's really clear from the presentations and the point that Jeff made in his opening remarks is, you know, water security is, you know, it's cross-cutting. It's not just about, you know, WASH. We have to think about the livelihoods dimensions, the ecosystems dimensions, the economic use of water. And, you know, what stands out for me right now is the private sector, the role of the private sector, the industries who are using water and perhaps polluting water, agriculture, which is the largest user of water. What is the role of the private sector in helping us also fill or fill in some of these resourcing gaps, particularly to address some of the issues that you raised, Marissa? I open it up to any of you, if anybody would like to weigh in. Turiro, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. From our experience, and when you look at the contribution of the private sector, it's very crucial, but at the same time, it needs to be thought through. And, you know, some very relevant frameworks, you know, coming in on what the private sector can contribute and what benefits are there, I mean, for them and other stakeholders after that. We have had a weakness this side where the contribution of the private sector is actually being sought mostly using some kind of either guilt tripping or you know, accusing that you use water this way, you pollute water this way. So the more they look at it as some kind of obligation or some kind of, you know, punishment that has to be meted on them. You know, the private sector has a lot of other capacities. For example, they can go to court. They have a lot of media presence, so they can quickly, you know, make any story, you know, work for their favor. And this is not a bad thing at all if you can actually use it for actually, you know, your end in the basin. So the approach that we have tried to do using landscape approach within IUCN is that when you do an initiative, you first try to identify every stakeholder, including the private sector, then get it from what they are willing to do and what they are able to do. Sometimes they'll tell you that we do not have certain capacities, but out of our budget, we are willing to give you so much so that you're able to give this to the communities. In Malawi, we had a sugar corporation that said, look, we want to help with land restoration around the area where we farm, and we want to do this with the communities. But we do not want to take money out of our budget and say, here's money, because when we do that, politicians come to us and say, give me money to go and campaign in my constituents, and we cannot control that. So these are some of the dynamics that come up, but I think the private sector can really come in once the vision is sold to them very well. And let's look at it. Let's look at the mines. Let's look at the private conservancy and so forth. They are huge users of our water resources. And from what I've seen, they are willing to play their part. But how we frame that and how we make them come in as a partnership and a continuous partnership with that, not as some donor seeking or some fine kind of pursuit with them, it can really work. But one of the weaknesses that we have in this region, as I mentioned earlier, about how the frameworks really work. If water is managed only from a government perspective all the time, rules coming from government, statutes coming from government, discussions just being about government, we then sideline the private players a lot. So that part, you know, needs to really be opened up a bit more so that everyone feels that they own this process and that when they are contributing, they are doing so because it is also for their benefit.
Yeah, I can just add a few words. I mean, this is also something that SWP in the recent year, in this most recent year, has been helping Usaid think through a little bit. But yeah, I think, and one of SWP's partners, the Water Mandate, has been working on this a lot too. I mean, I agree that there's only so much that the private sector can do, but I think partnering with the private sector and partnering with them to push their own out of their own comfort zone on looking at their full water footprint and their full set of water risks. So sort of moving beyond social license to operate type interventions where, you know, where private sector actors are located in basins or where some of their supply chains exist. You know, moving beyond that to having reducing water risks be part of their core business approach, and then also thinking more about kind of collective action approaches within, you know, certain geographies or even beyond. I mean, with supply chains, the water, you know, talking about water just in the context of a basin is no longer totally relevant. You know, that footprint can extend where products go and, you know, where supply chains go. So trying to leverage our what we can bring to the table in terms of supporting things like data for understanding what the sort of baseline conditions are for a corporate entity that wants to engage on water stewardship or better basin water management, and then just on the governance side too, like what are the levers of influencing and working on water resources management. I think, you know, we're looking to think about how we can craft partnerships more along those lines to support private sector partners in really engaging in water resources management together with other partners, not just you know, not just trying to offset say water use for one small dimension of their activity. But I think there's a lot of promise there, and there's a lot of momentum building towards that type of approach. I think it's going to take a while to get to bear fruit, but I think that's where things are headed, and there's a lot of promise in that.
Certainly. Marissa?
Maybe if we want to connect this back to the data conversation, because I feel like one initial step, one good step to start engaging and creating these partnerships with the private sector is the data sharing space. And I feel like as we create these models and analytical tools, as they contribute with their data, that's a very, you know, data is power, data is money too, right? I mean, we know that they have information and data that they have gathered in the private sector. It needs to come into the analytical tool so we have a better representation, and they can see that they can see for themselves better how taking that step and collaborating this data sharing space can be beneficial for them in understanding better what are the solutions that are integrated that can benefit them and others.
Thanks, Marissa. These are all, I think, really valuable points, and I've sort of taken us slightly off of our questions, but I think this is a really important question. I'm going to build on this a little bit further, but, you know, looking ahead for our final question, and I'm going to frame this in two parts. You know, one of the lessons learned from SWP is that stakeholder engagement is really critical. Stakeholders need to be a sort of front and center in the water security improvement process. And one of the other sort of predominant lessons in the country profile assessments that we did is that water management challenges persist because there's a lack of coordination across, you know, institutions. And listening to the points that the three of you just raised now about sort of collaborating and engaging the private sector, it got me thinking about this role of coordination. And is coordination enough? Or do we need to be thinking about stakeholder engagement and coordination differently as we look forward into the future, given the increasing complexities and complex challenges that we'll be facing, particularly with climate change? So, I mean, looking ahead, how should we as implementers, as researchers and thinkers, as funders and you know, donors of these projects be prioritizing resources and certain types of approaches for water security improvements? And second, are there specific trends or opportunities that make you optimistic about the future? I mean, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom, and I think rightfully so, given everything that's happening around the world with our water resources and climate, and political uncertainty in many places, and how all of these things are tied together. But you know, ending on sort of a forward-looking sort of positive note is also nice sometimes. And you know, I'd be interested in hearing from your perspective in the work that you're doing. You know, what keeps you excited and motivated as we continue to work for water security improvement? Turier, I'll start with you. You're on mute. You're still on mute. Oh, Marissa, I'll turn to you while we get his audio sorted.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're back? Okay, go ahead, Turier.
Okay, yes, we have a program in IUCN called Building River Dialogue and Governance, shortened to BRIDGE, which is a nice acronym because we try to make, you know, create that bridge between stakeholders and among, you know, conflicting parties. And one of the things that we do there is open dialogue spaces, both at national and, you know, transboundary level. And one thing we then learned, because we've been implementing BRIDGE for more than 10 years now, one thing we then learned is that bringing people together is easy, but what they talk about in the end, how they express it, is a totally different matter altogether. Otherwise, you may tick boxes and have a good head count, or the gender is balanced, the sectors are represented, but the discussion is dominated by only one or two sectors. So we have now coupled that with some water diplomacy training that we now do. So this fits especially in the transboundary basins where some negotiations have to be done around treaties or RBO planning and so forth. The idea is to build capacity to make the stakeholders really know what and how to talk about, and then you bring this to accompany the dialogues, to make the dialogues effective. But further to that, one of the things that we've also been trying to promote in some shared river basins is to first develop a stakeholder engagement strategy, then build a stakeholder platform where the dialogue can continuously happen, not to wait for the contesting parties to actually meet at certain predetermined you know, periods, maybe set by national government or so, but to create that need at a more localized level so that they know that, okay, so every 3 months, nothing has to happen first, no emergency has to happen. We meet and talk. And then that helps because when you actually check the early warning systems and you know what happens with climate change, certain information can be fed quickly in these discussion platforms, especially when you bring in other people from, for example, the meteorological department and so forth. Then everyone is aware that the water we're sharing now is most likely going to be, you know, way less in the next 3 months. So what can we do about certain provisions that you're already using now that may be difficult in the next 3 months? So that's part of what we try to support. And I should say we have actually made a lot more success with this, with the dialogues and the training workshops on water diplomacy, more than with anything else. There seems to be a lot of demand around this. But when I look forward, when you talk about looking ahead, what can we actually do to make, you know, water security much of a priority and really to win? Well, focusing on the positive side, I'll actually say one negative thing in order to build on the positive. In our region, mostly, we are actually now having climate emergencies. The flooding is actually now frequent, and you know, some happens at transboundary scale, some at local scale. So that is a catastrophe. But here's the thing: you do not want to waste a tragedy. So that the good thing around that is actually making the politicians look into water issues, because ideally they don't care much about them until there's an emergency. So now this emergency is bringing this, and you are beginning to see a presidential task team looking into victims of water emergencies and so forth. You see that in South Africa, you see that in Zimbabwe. To me, that is nice because it brings agency, it brings actors. And then the second thing around what we really must do, I think sharing information around water is important, but where we miss it is we fail to mainstream this information sharing. The way we get news about anything else should be the same way we get news about water. And this comes back to how we actually communicate the data and information that we have once we have it. So this is one of the things that is slowly now getting better in this region. The downside is that it is all being sponsored by donors, which is not a nice thing because that affects sustainability, but it's gaining traction, and we're hopeful around that. And lastly, I want to say I'm very happy to see the building of synergies actually growing. The synergies, with other sectors outside water, whether I'm talking about, the academic science sectors, the agriculture, the land management, and so forth. Most of the work we do, people are really beginning to realize that water is not a standalone issue, but rather is integrated in everything else. Whether I want to talk about food security, whether I talk about resilience, whether I want to talk about disaster reduction and so forth, you're still talking about water in a way. So even within some programming areas in the NGOs in this region, you see a lot of the time now, the water program is no longer a standalone program. It's embedded in other programs, which is a good start. And in governments, they are beginning to let us, approach them in the same way. So I am hopeful that this continues and this helps us. Well, we can only be hopeful. Water security is human security, and we need it. Thank you, Beza.
Thank you. Next appearance means that we are unfortunately at time, so we can continue moving on with the agenda. But I do want to thank Marissa, Ali, and Taviro for what I think was a really engaging discussion. The three of you drew some really important points, and I think we were able to see some common themes and threads to emerge. And I hope this is just the conversation will continue among us and as a broader community as well. So thank you.
I would just allow for like 30 minutes of Marissa and 30 seconds, of Marissa and 30 seconds of Ali as a final word. Marissa, go ahead.
I'll go for it. So what gives me hope, I think this realization that we are thinking about water not as a local issue, but as a global area in which we all can collaborate. And that is not only transboundary, but beyond the boundaries of the watershed. I think the fact that we are thinking about ecosystems and freshwater ecosystems in particular in more direct ways, and how to maintain the habitats for those systems and how to prioritize the water that needs to go to those ecosystems, I think is very important as well, and gives me also hope. And finally, I think this focus on participation and how we are breaking all these traditional governance admin settings, and how we are breaking that through, look at us, we are here in I don't know how many continents, sitting through this virtual setting. Look at all of what we did during COVID, that we were able to, despite all the challenges, make progress. I feel that also gives me hope in terms of reaching a better engagement and participation of all the sectors and communities in the water discussion. I'll stop there.
Thanks. Ali?
Sure, and I can just add a few thoughts, and then my colleague Sam is going to provide some remarks, so maybe he'll build on that a little bit. But yeah, just to build on what Marissa and Tariro said, first, one of the things that gives me hope is the growing momentum for protection of ecosystem services, payment for ecosystem services, and nature-based solutions as a way to address both water resource management, water supply issues, and also climate change adaptation. I think that within the Usaid portfolio, we're gathering steam on learning about those approaches, and I think that they offer me some hope that we'll be able to better tackle some of these issues moving forward than we have with other approaches in the past. And then also building on some of the points that both of the other panelists brought up, I think just broadening the constituency for water. I mean, I think, and maybe in the context of climate change is one good example right now. I mean, I think water does run through so many of the different sector challenges, and climate change is front and center there. And just being able to kind of I think there's a lot of action that we're seeing the sector try to broaden its constituency in terms of supporting addressing these other development challenges through work on kind of integrated water resources management and water security lens. So yeah, those are two points I'll close out with. And just to say again, thanks so much for the opportunity to participate in this panel. Basil.
Thank you very much to all four of you. This was very interesting, and we could speak about this for many more hours. Unfortunately, we're at time, so I would like to invite Sam Houston for some closing remarks before closing the webinar with Mr. Georgette Debroy. Sam Houston is a water resources and infrastructure professional with expertise working in emerging markets and developing countries. He has 15 years of project management experience working in water supply, infrastructure, urban sanitation, utility reform, so many more other water-related things and conflicts in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. Prior to joining USAID, Mr. Houston served as the chief of party of USAID's WASHFIN project. So Mr. Sam Houston has a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from University of Minnesota as well, and a master's degree in conflict resolution from the University of Bradford. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you to the whole SWP team for all of your hard work and persistence in managing this important project for USAID over the last 5 years. As a former implementer, I certainly know how difficult it is to bring together all the pieces of the puzzle to advance a complex project. In these closing remarks, I want to highlight a few themes that have come out of the discussions and offer a few words on what we're doing at USAID and what we plan to do based on learning from SWP's work to advance water security programming. As we've heard, SWP advanced a framework for working on water sanitation and water resource management under a broader framing of water security. As climate and demographic change, in addition to shocks like COVID, continue to put pressure on economies, infrastructure, and the environment, it is increasingly clear that a strategy to increase access to WASH needs to be based on resilient approaches to future uncertainties and current uncertainties, as we heard from our discussions. SWP's work on developing a holistic approach to identifying, assessing, and addressing a full suite of water security challenges affecting communities has very much helped to advance our thinking. Here at USAID Washington, we now have a water security lens that underpins our overall global water security strategy, and such thinking is also being used in the forthcoming agency climate change strategy as well. More importantly, at country level, we're increasingly seeing water security activities emerging, such as in the Sahel, a context that is increasingly unstable and where overall resilience to shocks and stresses is at the heart of the challenge. USAID's TERO-B, an associate award under SWP, is working to support water security as well as conflict and disaster risk reduction through better planning, improved data, and capacity building of local partners. Similarly, in Central Asia, USAID's new WAVE activity is working to strengthen regional cooperation and capacity to manage shared water resources, including focusing on balancing the availability of water for reliable electricity across the region, supporting agricultural productivity in which much of the region's economy depends, and ensuring sufficient water is available for human consumption and ecosystems. All of this builds on SWP's approach to increasing stakeholder engagement, gender equity, capacity building for institutions, and bringing better analysis and data to decision-making via methods that are centered on incorporating uncertainties in stakeholder-driven scenario planning. Lastly, in Nepal, SWP's work has influenced the design of the mission's new flagship water activity, KAWAS, which will work to create healthy, resilient, and water-secure communities at the watershed level through strengthening water and sanitation governance that improves water resource management, including water for more resilient and biodiverse ecosystems. We only expect these types of broader water security work streams to continue to grow within USAID. Also, we are aware that we have much more to do to prioritize work on water security and in closing the enormous financing gaps and to future-proof investments in economic and social development, all which depends on better water resource management. As part of that, we at USAID Washington are building from lessons learned from SWP to further advance thought leadership and research, because we know we don't have all the answers to ensuring a climate resilient and secure water resource management for the future. Our experiences with SWP and other central programs over the past 5 years have crystallized our recognition that we need to support implementation research. And as a result, we're increasing our investments in this space to support better and more resilient outcomes across both WASH and WRM programming. And we will soon launch 3 new research and learning activities focused on advancing our understanding of what works and what doesn't work for advancing water security in both urban and rural settings, as well as sanitation and hygiene programming. We look forward to guiding our portfolio towards more sustainable frameworks based on effective water resource management models like those advanced by SWP's work. The elevation of water resource management and climate adaptation will certainly be incorporated into the next generation of USAID and US government strategies, all aimed at advancing climate resilient WASH services and more resilient water resource management. Thank you very much for all your hard work and all of the excellent contributions that have been presented here today. And we very much appreciate the overall contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Joyjit Debroy will now have some final words to conclude this rich webinar. Mr. Debroy is the Executive Vice President of Global Programs at Windrock International, overseeing all aspects of program delivery across the globe. Joyjit.
Thank you, Nicola. On behalf of Windrock International, I would like to take this opportunity to thank USAID for entrusting Windrock and its partners with the Sustainable Water Partnership. It has been a fascinating 5-year journey to strengthen water security across the globe. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank our project partners who brought invaluable expertise to the project. In no particular order, the Tetra Tech, the Stockholm Environmental Institute, IUCN, MWater, the World Resources Institute, IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, and then the CEO Water Mandate. Thank you also to a long list of staff and individuals who have collaborated on the project over the past 5 years. The Sustainable Water Partnership shaped Windrock's water practice around risks and solutions to address water security at scale. It allowed us to move from protection of water resources to water service delivery and sanitation, from supporting ecosystems and environmental protection to the engagement of users and stakeholders at local, national, and transboundary scales. The water security improvement process that Alex and others talked about before me provides practitioners and decision makers with an actionable and iterative framework to address issues of water governance and resource management, making small steps in what sometimes seems like an overwhelming challenge possible. With climate change more than ever pressing us to safeguard our resources and to adapt our practices, and only adding to stress from pollution, demography, or unequal natural distribution across different geographies, water is clearly the essential piece of the puzzle for sustainable development. Our distinguished speakers have made this very clear throughout the webinar today. By engaging experts and researchers, the Sustainable Water Partnership has proposed tangible solutions and reflections to move the needle in this area. We've tested its hypothesis in various pilot projects and different contexts that were discussed today. And the Sustainable Water Partnership has confirmed that actions at different levels and scales can be effective if not necessary. By supporting USAID, we also hope that we've helped shape policies and funding streams by considering water security as a cornerstone of multi-sector development. The Sustainable Water Partnership will continue to live through its tools and technical resources. Some of them were presented today, but also with the ongoing partnership with USAID in the Sahel that was talked about around water and land security, with the Terravi Associate Award, which runs until 2024 in Burkina Faso and Niger. Before officially closing this webinar and the Sustainable Water Partnership, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers and panelists today. And finally, a big thank you to all of you in the audience for attending this webinar. We hope that this program and webinar was useful to you and that we brought up some valuable thoughts and ideas to apply in your work. Thank you, everyone.